Okay, Parshas Emor. I want to share tonight a kasha with you that I'll tell you what some of the Gedolei Achrayim answer to that question, and then perhaps if we look a little deeper in the pasuk, what we might be able to learn ourselves from that question. Parshas Emor begins with the Isser of Kaihanim to be Metame L'Mesim. So, Kaihanim are on a very tremendous Maila. They're the Shluchei Didan, Shluchei Derachmana, but they're in a position of tremendous gadlus, and because of that, they are told to keep away from Tumas Meis. Tumas Meis, as we've said many times, represents the lowliness of man, the failure of man, the descent of the Maila of Adam, and the Kayin, who's the shliach to bring us up in Madrega, has to keep himself away from Tumas Meis. The Torah begins, however, with a halacha that's negea not just to Tumas Meis, but negea to many, many halachas, and that's the drasha that the Gemara in Yevamos makes from Emor ve'omarta. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emor el hakohanim b'nei Aaron, ve'omarta aleim l'nefesh lo yitama ba'amav. Emor ve'omarta. So it's a kefil haloshen. Say and you should say. Say to the Kaihanim and you should say. That's a repetitive. So Rashi brings the Gemara in Yevamos lahazir gedolim alaktanim. That the idea is that gedolim who have das should make sure that the ketanim, that the children, don't fall prey to this halacha and that they don't become tamei. Now it's interesting that there's a machlokes the Torah brings, machlokes Rishonim, between the Rambam and the Torah, what the din is of holding back ketanim kaihanim from becoming tamei meis. I mean, we're very careful, ad kidei kach, that even though b'nei Aaron v'lo b'nei Aaron, even though women, kaihanim, are permitted to become tamei meis, but if a woman is expecting, we will not allow her to go into a place where there's a body to a levaya in case she's having a boy. And that boy is then in a place where there's a mace. But the Rambam holds, very interesting, the Rambam holds, the Tur and Shin Ayin Gimel in Yeredeya brings the Shitas HaRambam, that the Rambam holds that the Isser is not that you have to prevent Ketanim from becoming Tamei. The Isser is to make Ketanim Tamei. You are not allowed to feed them the Isser. You're not allowed to impose the Isser. But if a Kayin Katan on his own will go to a place where he has a Maga with a Tumas Meis, that's okay. That's what the Rambam holds. The Torah disagrees, and the Torah holds that no, that there's an Isser to be mafresh me'isura. That it's not only is there an Isser to introduce the Isser to him, but also if a Kayin Katan is going to make himself Tamei Meis, one has to be Maineya him from making himself Tamei. The Mefarshim ask, it's a Pella because the Torah in other places doesn't paskin that way. When it comes to other dinim, it's Nageya in Hilchas Shabbos, it's Nageya in Hilchas Shratzim, Hilchas Dam, that comes up in different places. The Torah paskins like the Rambam. The Torah paskins, as long as you're not feeding it to him, that's the Isser. But for him to do it on his own, that's not the Isser. And the Torah seems to change track specifically by Hilchas Tumas Meis. So I found a very, very, very interesting find. And that is that I discovered, I did not know this, and I don't know what's behind this. I don't know the story behind it, but apparently it was printed in Tafshin Pei Gimel. I don't know if it existed before, but there's a sefer called Divrei Chachamim That's written by Rabbi Avram Danzig. You know who Rabbi Avram Danzig is? The Chayadim. And it's a Sefer Al Torah from the Chayadim. Isn't that interesting? And I didn't know it existed. You knew such a thing existed? I didn't know it existed. And he says a very interesting thing. He says, and there's true, there's the Satmar Rav in the Divrei Yoel in this week's Parsha talks about this question as well, as does the Mizrahi. He says that that we say, Emor v'yomarta lahazir g'daylam alaktanim, that's what Rashi brings from the Gemara in Yevamis, but there's a place in Shas where there's Hilchas Tumah. That is the rush in the end of Menachos, where there are halachas ketanos from the rush, Hilchas Tzitzis, Hilchas Talis, Hilchas Tefillin, whatever, all the different halachas. So the rush has Hilchas Tumah. And the very beginning of Hilchas Tumah, in Aleph, the Rosh brings that Ketanim are not allowed to become Tamei, and he doesn't learn it out from Emor v'Yomarta. He learns it out from HaKohanim b'nei Aaron. The Kohanim, the children of Aaron. So he learns that it's the Kohanim and their children. What? Because they say that usually in the Torah, when it says Kohanim and Bnei Aaron, it says Bnei Aaron HaKohanim. And the fact that it switches it around and it says HaKohanim Bnei Aaron, so it already mentioned the Kohanim, and now the Bnei Aaron is their children. If they're Gedolim, then they're the Bnei Aaron. So clearly it's talking about the Ketanim. That's what the Rosh says. The Gemara says not that way. The Gemara says that we learn it from Emor v'Yomarta, not from HaKohanim Bnei Aaron. But the Rosh brings that we learn it from HaKohanim Bnei Aaron. And the truth is that the Rosh is not without a source. If you look at the Safra, if you look at the Teres Kohanim, in the beginning of Parshas Emor, it says, Bnei Aaron, Elu HaKtanim. Those are the words of the Safra. So the Rosh is a very good makar from the Teres Kohanim, that the Ketanim is learned out from Bnei Aaron. The question is, what do you need two drushes for? Emor v'Yomarta lahazir g'daylam alaktanim, and HaKohanim b'nei Aaron lahazir g'daylam alaktanim. Zok the Chayei Adam. That's why the Torah paskins differently by Tumas Misa. Usually, you have one azhara of lahazir g'daylam alaktanim, and that is that you should not give them, you should not introduce the Isser to them. But since there are two drushes of Parshas Emor, one of Emor v'Yomarta and one of HaKohanim b'nei Aaron, that seems to indicate that the halacha goes a step further, and that includes even allowing the cotton to become tummy. That's the shtickle Torah that he says. Others say it also. It's a nice ideas about this lahazir g'daylam alaktanim. However, I think there's makom here for us to look deeper into the inyan, and ultimately, after we look deeper into the inyan, to look deeper into ourselves. Because you have to ask yourself, Emor v'Omarta, lahazir g'daylam alaktanim is used all over Shas. The Kohanim b'nei Aaron, that's special for here maybe, but Emor v'Omarta is an inyan that's used all over Shas that you're not allowed to give Isser to Ketanim. So the Torah could have picked many Isurim to introduce the halacha that you shouldn't involve Ketanim. But the Torah chose, of all of the different Isurim and restrictions that exist in the Torah, where it would make sense to talk about whether or not you should hold children back or you should introduce that Isur to children, the Torah chose specifically Tumas Misa. And I want to try to understand, I think it's a very valid question, of all the halachas in the Torah, why is Tumas Misa, why is that Isser, that restriction, the appropriate place to talk about the concept of Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim? So I think the Mahalach is as follows. I think the Mahalach is to go back. That's why I specifically chose to speak about this week, because over the winter we've mentioned these Yesaidas several times. And that is to go back and to understand this concept that we have this thing called Tumas Misa, that we have to purify ourselves from the effect of coming into contact with a mace. Because we know that when Adam Rishon was created, as the Ramban says in Parshas Bereshis, that when Adam was created, he was supposed to live forever. Meaning, what does it mean that he was supposed to live forever? Meaning that the fusion of the guf and the neshama was complete. The Ramban struggles with it. The Ramban says there are those who say that two things fusing together could never be complete. But he says wasn't the case before the Chet. Ani Oimer, so going to lush it there. He says they know that before the Chet, the guf and the neshama, the guf was the malbush of the neshama. There was no ra inside. The fusion was perfect. The guf and the neshama were a perfect shidduch for each other, and they would never separate. That's what misa is, when the guf and the neshama separate. And then Adam did his chet. And when Adam did his chet, there was a disturbance in that shidduch between the body and soul. Because the guf then became infected, I should say, by the Yetzer Hara. And it started to have its own agenda, which is the Yetzer Hara that we know, that we have today. It started to have its own agenda, pulling us away from the neshama. The guf was no longer a perfect malbush of the neshama. And that's why Adam suddenly realized that he wasn't wearing anything. As we pointed out many times over the year, that because before the chet he was wearing something, he was wearing a body. His neshama was melubish and a guf. It's only when the guf became its own thing that suddenly it was without a malbush. Because it wasn't a pneumius with a chitzonius anymore. It was two separate, approaches, two separate pulls, two separate kaiches. So Memela at that point, that's why Adam was, he recognized he needed to cover himself. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu set Adam on the journey to be misaken himself by making him begadim. And ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set aside Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avram, who's called Ha'adam Hagadol Ba'anakim, the great Adam, to create a nation that was going to be a new Mahadura of Adam. The old Mahadura of Adam was deteriorated, and it was unable to accomplish what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted that it should accomplish. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to restore that great Adam of Kaidem Achet. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov the job to create a nation that would ultimately stand by Har Sinai and step back into the role of Adam Arishon Kaidem Achet. And Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did that. And Klal Yisrael stood by Har Sinai. And the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Peiches, Paska Zuhamasa, the Zuhama from the Chet of Adam Arishon was Pesach, and you had back this glorious Adam that's ready to do the mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted from that original Adam of La'avda U'Lashamra, and then to go from there to being Mis'anag al Hashem, Lehanais Meziv Shchinasai, Lenetzach Nitzachim. And had we not done the Egel, that would have been the end, and they would have lived happily ever after. And that's why Chazal tell us, also the Gemara in Yevamos, the Chazal tell us, Adam Atem. You are Adam. Atem Kriyam Adam. You're called Adam. Ve'enu Ma'isa Kriyam Adam. Now here's the part that's very, very important. Klal Yisrael did worship the Egel. And when they worshipped the Egel, it was almost like a repetition of the Chet of Adam Arishon. And once again, they were thrown down into the world of Misa and the imperfect world that we live in today. But it's a mistake to think, and people make this terrible mistake. It's a mistake to think that we're left today the same way we were before we stood by Har Sinai. That is a big toast. While it's true that as individuals we will die because we did worship the Egel, and once again that Ra, that Zuhama became part of us again, but the fact that we stood by Har Sinai, and that as an ummah, Vayichan Yisrael neged ha'ar ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, as a nation, we stepped into the role of Adam Rishon Kaidem Achet, That was never taken from us. In fact, if you look carefully, you'll see that the tzibur of Klal Yisrael is treated like Adam Rishon Kaidem Achet. That's why the Gemara says, HaTzibur lo yimes. The tzibur, that's why Klal Yisrael can't die. That's how we know Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. Because as an Ummah, we're still Adam Atem. And that means that we're still on a journey. We're still on that journey that we're Be'ezer Hashem, Ba'achris Hayamim, we will return to the Madrega of Adam Kaidem Achet. And we're not where we started. We're carrying within us at the same time dual Madregas. We have the Madrega where we seem to be the same as Umay Sa'olam. We die, they die, we get sick, they get sick. We seem to be the same. But hiding within us, Tamun B'kirbeinu, is a maila that the nations of the world can't even be masig, a maila of another tzuras adam that's greater than anything that the world has seen since Klal Yisrael stood by Har Sinai. And that's also inside of us. That's also part of our gadlus. I want to tell you something. I think it's an unbelievable thing. There was an Oymid this week, a few weeks ago, in Parshas Azriah, that the level, I'm not sure if I mentioned it here or not, but if I did, it'll be a chazara. When a woman becomes a tumas yeledes, which the tumah that happens to a woman when she has a child, that's also a result of this chet of Adam. Why on earth would a Jewish child being born be a cause for tumah? I can't think of a more reason to have a cause for kedusha. I don't see this as a cause for tumah. Why is the birth of a child a cause for tumah? This inyan is the very, very first thing I ever heard from the Rosh Yeshiva when I got to Eretz Yisrael as a bacher. The first Shabbos that I walked from the Mir to, I don't know if it was Parshas Azriah. And he explained that since Adam Rishon did the Chet, when a child is born, a child who's going to die was born. That's what he explained. He said the clock starts ticking then. He says that's why we call the Rechem a Kever, right? In Halacha we call it a Kever. Ein psichas ha-kever b'lo dam. Because it's the makom where this person who was supposed to be Chai La'olam and will die was born. And I remember when I was 18 and I heard this, 19 perhaps, I remember feeling like, yeah, but still, he not dying, he's being born. It took a few years, but I now understand what he meant. What he meant was, Tumas Yeledes, like Tumas Misa, is not a siman of our pchisos, it's a siman of our gadlus. Goyim don't have Tumas Yeledes. In some Ifanim they have Tumas Misa, we can talk about that, but Goyim don't have Tumas Yeledes. Why? They're on a higher madrega than us? Of course not. Pshita, that the reason why we have Tumas Yeledes and they don't, is because when they have a baby, what's being born is perfect. That's the way it's supposed to be. But when we have a baby, what's being born is imperfect because we're still looking for something greater. You find this when Chazal describe the difference between the sun and the moon. Chazal say that the sun is connected to Umay Sa'olam and the moon is connected to Klal Yisrael. Really? The sun is Umay Sa'olam and the little fickle moon is Klal Yisrael? Yes. Because Umay Sa'olam today, they're already B'shlei Musam. But we are Shehei Masidim Lehischadesh Kamoisa Ulefa'er Liyotzra. We're just a fraction of what we're going to be. That's why we're nimshal to the Levana that starts off as a thin thing and grows more and more shalem. The same thing is true when a baby is born. A baby is born, so if it's a Gayish baby that's meant to be the humanity of after the Chet, nothing wrong with them, but it's the humanity of after a Chet, Chaviv Adam Shanivra B'Tzelem, but it's the Tzelem of after the Chet, so there's no Tumah, what's wrong? But we have a destiny, because inside of us is the genetics of the Adam of Kaidam HaChet. Because we did stand by Har Sinai, and we were Paska Zuhama. And therefore, when a child is born, there's a tumah because there's a chisaron there. And when the mommy goes through the seder of being mitaher herself, she's showing the future and the kaichos that exist, that there's a path of going from here to there. So I want to just tell you something amazing. There's something unique about Tumas Yeledes. I'll jump back to Parshas Emor in a minute, but there's something unique about Tumas Yeledes that you don't have. You don't have in other Tumas. And that is that you have two stages. Such a pella. You have, for a boy, she's tamei for 7 days. For a girl, she's tamei for 14 days. By the way, just to speak out the obvious, the reason a girl is double the tumah of a boy is because the tumah is about childbirth, and the girl herself is about childbirth. So it's doubled. The mother had a child that will have a child. That's why it's not a chisaron in the female, it's a recognition of a maila. So it's tamei for 7 days or 14 days. And then when that tumah is over, the mother goes into another tkufa, that's 33 days for the zachar or 66 days for the nekeva, that's called demei tahara. Teshev al demei tahara. Meaning that even if she sees dam, she's tahara. 66 days, she's completely tahara. Matter of fact, she can't even become tamei. Except, she can't go into the Beis HaMikdash. And she can't handle kachin. El HaMikdash la yavai. What is that? What are these two stages? Unbelievable. Adam Arishan has 2 stages to go. We, Klal Yisrael, have 2 shlavim that we need to overcome. Number 1, we have to get out from under the cloud of tumah, of the chet. Once we get out from under the cloud of the chet, we now have to be oimid in that original nisayon of la'avda u'lashamra, so that we could enter the world of kedusha, of lehisaneg al Hashem. So when a Jewish child is born, he goes through that journey. His mother goes through that journey of getting under from the tumah. It's mamish living in tumah, being retired from the tumah, and then the tumah is gone. But there's still more to be done until you can go into the mikdash. That reflects exactly the journey that lies ahead for an Adam. When Klal Yisrael has to be zahir in Tumas Misa, it really is, now here's the punchline, the point here, and I think in Emes, there really is within Klal Yisrael a gadol and a katan. There really is the gadol, which is the atem kriyim adam, which is inside of us, and there's the katan of the post-chet, full Yetzirah adam, that's inside of us. And the parsha of being mitayr from Tumas Misa is a parsha of allowing that gadlus to affect the katnus, of being makir, that there's a greatness inside of us. So that's the parsha that we learn, lahazir g'daylim alaktanim, that older people should be mazir younger people, because the whole process of Tara from Tumas Meis is an element of the gadlus of Klal Yisrael, or the gadlus of the Adam being mashpia on the katnus. The katnus, let's say, being a cause for the tumah, let's say, and the gadlus being the capacity to transcend that tumah. And that's the nekuda of lahazir g'daylim alaktanim, which really brings us to something that's very, very, very personal within a person. And that is, the Sfarim tell us, or Dessler writes about this by Arichas, that we do have within us elements of gadlus and elements of katnus. And you find it sometimes could be so surprising that sometimes we sit around here learning Torah, we're like in a mode of gadlus. But we could instantly become babies also. The silliest thing could distract us. We do have inside of us the gadlus and the katnus. I think I've told you this story before, and it's not a flattering story for me, but it explains my point so well that I have to tell it to you. It was a tkufa, I was trying to lose weight, and there was and Yeshiva Waterbury Atara Shmuel made a dinner, and I went to attend the dinner, and at some point in the dinner, you reach that point that it's enough. I decided it's time to go home. So I went out, but I didn't have a ma'ariv, so I went to get a minyan for ma'ariv in the lobby of the dinner. And I really, really wanted to daven well, even though it's a little of a tumultic place. And I remember that I was working very, very, very hard to daven well. Little did I know that while we were davening Shemona Esrei, didn't realize that we were in the way of the caterer. The caterer was setting up the desserts right there. Okay? Now, I was on a diet. Okay? So, I was davening. I wish I didn't have to tell you this, but I think it's important. I was davening. Shema Koleinu, Hashem Elokeinu, Chus v'rachim aleinu. Now, you know when you're davening with your eyes closed, especially in a strange place and there's tumult around you, your eyes open for a second sometimes. You're just you know what I'm talking about? So my eyes opened for a second, and I'm like, the Kabel cream puffs. Mamish like that. And then I start negotiating with myself. Maybe I could have one. Umilfanecha malkeinu reikam. It's amazing. We're gedolim and we're ketanim. And the katnus could come out in taiva ways, and in kas ways, and hakpada ways, in the nuances of our childishness. And the gadlus could come out. People that you think could be the most simple people could have expressions of such longing for your shemayim and growth and aliyah that it's just breathtaking their greatness. What they're willing to do for other people, it's just breathtaking their greatness. We have inside of us a gadol and a katan. And it's not so surprising because we're a people that has inside of us a gadol and a katan. We have a paskazu hamasa inside of us, an oimek, a depth, a destiny of atem kriyam adam, and we have a reality of today where we say cream puffs. And that's part of the mission of Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim. Part of the mission of Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim is to allow that gadlus in us to be mazhir the katnus in us. And that you have to be very, very, very careful. Because for many people, in my experience, and I know that Rabbi Yosef agrees with me, in many, many people, they're makir that they have a gadlus and a katnus, and the two hate each other. The gadol hates the katan, and the katan hates the gadol. And we walk around at war with ourselves. Because the gadol in me is embarrassed of the katan, humiliated and ashamed and disgusting the things that the katan is interested in. And the katan feels controlled and judged and mitzumtzum from the gadol. Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim doesn't mean to facilitate a war within yourself. Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim means to sit down with the gadol and the katan, and to have a conversation with the gadol and the katan, and to be able to learn how to be misyaches to the needs of the katan, and how to not lose sight of the she'ifas of the gadol. And it's too short right now to get into in detail, but it's something for a person to acknowledge that he has that depth inside of him. The reason I tell the story, even though I don't love telling the story, the reason I tell the story is because it's healthy for me to acknowledge it. We have gadlus in us, we have katnus. And when I sit here in front of an olam, I'm feeling my gadlus, I'm not feeling my katnus. But I need to remember that it doesn't stay that way, that there's katnus there. And sometimes it does fly into my head even while I'm speaking. And sometimes I will have thoughts, even looking around the room, that really are coming from the katan. I don't know, Reb David doesn't look so happy tonight. I know maybe you won't come back next week. I don't know, whatever. I know you'll be back, but, but you can start having like as if this is about me, or this is or thank you for coming, this is a group therapy for me, that type of thing. No, we have those katnus parts of ourselves. We also have gadlus parts of ourselves, and we could be makir about that about ourselves. And we have a goal, and the goal is to do what we do with our children. How do we treat our children? The mashal is a mashal of gedolim and ketanim. And that is that we want to give our children hasagas. And we want to show our children a path. And we want to show them what's possible. But we also want to allow them to exist. And that's the goal of Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim. And getting back to the Rabbi Avram Danzig and the Rush and the Psukim in Hilchas Tumah and the Emor v'Amarta versus HaKohanim B'nai Aaron that we started with. Perhaps there's two drushes here. Perhaps al pi derech Hilchas Deis v'Chayvus Alavavos, we could say that there's one Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim about the G'daylim to the Ktanim. And there's one Lahazir G'daylim Alaktanim for the internal gedolim and ketanim. It's to teach us that the inyan of tahara from tumas meis teaches us that there's a lahazir gedolim alaktanim that's internal, to allow ourselves to find. If you will be nice to the katan will let you be the gadol. If the katan wouldn't feel so abused by the gadol, then the gadol would be able to fully want the things that it wants. That's why it's so important to try to attend to that war between the gadol and the katan. So that's what I think is going on in this parsha of Tumas Meis, which brings out this dual Adam that exists within us. It's the exact right mashal to talk about Lahazir Gedolim Alaktanim, and it's Lahazir Gedolim Alaktanim in Chinuch. It's Lahazir Gedolim Alaktanim in being Mechanech ourselves. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the insight and the clarity to be able to have that dialogue between our gadol and our katan, so that will allow that the unbelievably high she'ifos and hasagas that we have should be able to express themselves in every part of our being. Yashakayach.